Commander Zethkar stared at the assignment pad in his clawed hands. The green text glowed against the dark metal surface, displaying what looked like another routine observation mission. After 300 years of watching civilizations rise and fall, he thought he had seen everything. The reptilian officer adjusted his position in the command chair and read the mission details again. The target was a species called humans. They lived on a blue world called Earth and had recently started traveling between stars. The High Council wanted him to observe their first real war. The enemy was the Krillian Empire, a military power that had conquered dozens of worlds over the past 1,000 years. Zethkar knew about the Krillians. They were efficient killers who used advanced technology and overwhelming force to crush younger species. Their ships were fast, their weapons were powerful, and their tactics were proven. Most species surrendered after the first battle. Those who didn't usually died in the second. The humans had been traveling in space for only 50 years. Their ships were crude and their weapons were basic. Intelligence reports showed they had no experience with large-scale warfare. The Krillians had already destroyed 3 human colonies without much effort. Now they were moving toward a world called New Haven. Zethkar sighed and input the coordinates into his ship's navigation system. His vessel, the Silent Observer, was equipped with the best stealth technology in the galaxy. He could watch the battle without being detected. The assignment seemed so simple that he was already thinking about his next mission. The journey to New Haven took 2 days. During the trip, Zethkar reviewed the files on both species. The Krillians were exactly what he expected. They followed standard military doctrine and used proven strategies. Their commander, General Vosak, had never lost a battle in 200 years of service. The humans were more interesting. Their military structure was chaotic compared to other species. They had multiple branches of service that often competed with each other. Their weapons technology was primitive, but they seemed to modify and improve it constantly. Most strange of all, they had no unified command structure for their colonies. New Haven was defended by Admiral Kate Morrison. She was 53 years old and had spent most of her career fighting pirates and smugglers. Her defensive fleet consisted of 12 ships against an incoming Krillian force of over 200 vessels. The humans were outnumbered more than 15 to 1. Zethkar positioned his ship at a safe distance from New Haven. His sensors could detect everything that happened in the system while remaining invisible. He prepared his recording equipment and opened a communication channel to monitor human transmissions. The Krillian fleet arrived exactly on schedule. Their ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel in a perfect formation. The massive dreadnoughts led the way, followed by cruisers and destroyers in neat rows. It was an impressive display of military power and discipline. The human response was immediate but confused. Their ships scattered in different directions instead of forming a battle line. Some moved toward the Krillians while others pulled back. Their communication channels filled with chatter as captains argued about tactics and positioning. Admiral Morrison's voice cut through the chaos. She spoke with a calm authority that reminded Zethkar of veteran commanders from other species. She ordered her ships to spread out and use the asteroid field near New Haven for cover. It was a defensive strategy, but Zethkar could see it would only delay the inevitable. The Krillian commander sent the standard surrender demand. His message was translated into human language and broadcast on all frequencies. The terms were typical for the Krillians: complete submission, immediate disarmament, and transfer of all military assets. Species that accepted these terms usually became slave worlds within a generation. Zethkar waited for the human response. Most species took several hours to debate surrender terms. Some tried to negotiate better conditions. A few foolishly attempted to fight and were quickly destroyed. The humans surprised him by responding within minutes. Admiral Morrison's message was brief and direct. She told the Krillians that New Haven would not surrender. She said the human fleet would fight to protect the colony. Her voice showed no fear, only determination. The transmission ended with a simple statement that would echo in Zethkar's memory for years to come. "We'll hold the line." The Krillian commander seemed amused by the human defiance. He ordered his fleet to advance and destroy the defensive force. The attack would be swift and overwhelming. General Vosak had used the same tactics hundreds of times before. First, the heavy ships would destroy the human fleet. Then ground forces would land and occupy the colony. The entire operation should take less than 6 hours. Zethkar settled back to observe what he assumed would be a routine conquest. He had seen many species make their last stand against superior forces. The pattern was always the same: initial defiance followed by desperate fighting and inevitable defeat. The humans might last longer than some species, but the outcome was certain. The first exchange of fire began when the Krillian fleet reached weapons range. Their energy cannons and missile batteries unleashed devastating salvos at the scattered human ships. The humans returned fire with their primitive kinetic weapons and nuclear missiles. The difference in technology was immediately obvious. Krillian shields easily deflected most human attacks, while their weapons cut through human armor like paper. Within the first 10 minutes, 2 human ships were destroyed and 3 others were badly damaged. The Krillians suffered no losses and only minor damage to their shields. But something felt wrong to Zethkar. The human ships weren't fighting the way he expected. Instead of trying to match the Krillian formation, they moved in seemingly random patterns. Some ships charged directly at the enemy, while others fled toward the asteroid field. Their tactics appeared chaotic and desperate. Captain Jake Sullivan commanded a human destroyer called the USS Liberty. His ship was one of the smallest in the human fleet, armed with only basic weapons and minimal armor. When the Krillian advance reached his position, Sullivan did something that defied all military logic. Instead of retreating or trying to fight from a distance, Sullivan ordered his ship to charge directly at a Krillian dreadnought. The massive enemy vessel was 10 times larger than the Liberty, and armed with enough firepower to destroy a small moon. Sullivan's attack looked like pure suicide. Zethkar watched in fascination as the tiny human ship raced toward certain destruction. The Krillian dreadnought didn't even bother to change course. Its point defense systems would easily destroy the approaching destroyer long before it could cause any damage. But Sullivan had a different plan. As his ship approached the dreadnought, he ordered his crew to abandon ship in escape pods. Then he triggered the Liberty's emergency reactor ejection system. The ship's nuclear reactor was designed to be jettisoned safely in case of emergency. Sullivan had modified the system to turn it into a weapon. The reactor exploded just as the Liberty reached the Krillian dreadnought. The nuclear blast overwhelmed the enemy ship's shields and tore through its hull. The massive vessel listed to one side, its main weapons offline and its engines damaged. Sullivan and most of his crew survived in their escape pods. The Krillian commander was shocked. He had never seen a tactic like that before. No civilized species would sacrifice an entire ship just to damage an enemy vessel. The loss of the Liberty should have been a victory for the Krillians, but instead they had lost their most powerful ship. Other human captains saw what Sullivan had done. Instead of being horrified by the sacrifice, they seemed inspired by it. Captain Lisa Park, commanding a human cruiser, immediately began modifying her ship's systems. She rerouted power from life support to weapons, giving her vessel twice its normal firepower. Park's ship could now fight on equal terms with larger Krillian vessels, but only for a short time. The life support modifications would kill her crew within hours. She didn't seem to care. Park led her cruiser into the heart of the Krillian formation and began destroying enemy ships with her enhanced weapons. Zethkar realized he was witnessing something unprecedented. The humans weren't just fighting a battle. They were treating their own ships and equipment as disposable weapons. Every sacrifice seemed to inspire more creative and dangerous tactics from other human commanders. The battle that should have ended in hours was still raging as the first day came to an end. The Krillians had destroyed most of the human fleet, but they had paid a terrible price. Their formation was broken, their flagship was crippled, and their casualties were mounting. Admiral Morrison continued to coordinate the defense from her damaged flagship. Her voice remained calm and steady even as explosions rocked her ship. She adapted her tactics constantly, finding new ways to hurt the enemy even as her forces were overwhelmed. Zethkar began to understand that this was not going to be a routine observation mission. The humans were fighting in a way he had never seen before. They seemed to have no regard for conventional military wisdom or their own safety. Every defeat taught them something new, and they used that knowledge immediately. As the first day of battle ended, Zethkar updated his preliminary report. The humans were losing, but they were not behaving like any species he had observed before. The second day of the battle began with the humans doing something that shocked Zethkar even more than their previous tactics. Instead of regrouping or calling for reinforcements, they launched rescue missions to save the crew members floating in space. Human ships broke away from defensive positions to collect escape pods, even while under heavy enemy fire. Captain Ben Hughes commanded a human frigate that had been badly damaged in the first day's fighting. His ship could barely maintain life support, and its weapons were mostly destroyed. Instead of withdrawing from the battle, Hughes volunteered to coordinate the rescue operations. Zethkar watched as Hughes maneuvered his crippled ship between the Krillian fleet and the scattered escape pods. The human captain used his vessel as a shield, absorbing enemy fire while smaller craft collected survivors. It was tactically insane, but it worked. Hundreds of human crew members were saved and transferred to other ships. The rescued personnel didn't rest or recover. Within hours, they were back in the fight aboard different vessels. Captain Sullivan, who had destroyed his ship the previous day, was given command of a damaged cruiser. He immediately began planning another desperate attack. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Park had survived the destruction of her ship and was now serving as Admiral Morrison's tactical advisor. She spent the night analyzing Krillian formations and looking for weaknesses. Park discovered that the enemy ships were most vulnerable during their recharge cycles when their shields dropped for a few seconds. The humans began timing their attacks to exploit these brief windows of vulnerability. Small groups of fighters would wait until a Krillian ship's shields dropped, then attack with everything they had. The damage was minimal, but it forced the Krillians to constantly adjust their formation and timing. General Vosak was becoming frustrated. The battle should have been over by now, but the humans kept finding new ways to cause problems. Their tactics made no sense according to standard military doctrine. They sacrificed valuable assets for minor advantages and seemed to learn from every defeat. The Krillian commander decided to end the battle quickly. He ordered a full assault on New Haven itself. If he couldn't defeat the human fleet cleanly, he would simply ignore it and take the planet. Once the colony was captured, the remaining human ships would have to surrender or watch their people die. The assault force consisted of 50 Krillian ships loaded with ground troops and heavy equipment. They moved past the human defensive line and headed directly for New Haven. It looked like the end of the battle, but Admiral Morrison had one more surprise ready. As the Krillian assault force approached the planet, hidden weapons platforms activated across New Haven's surface. The humans had been building defensive installations for months, disguising them as civilian structures. Fake hospitals revealed missile batteries and shopping centers opened to reveal particle cannons. The planetary defense system was primitive compared to Krillian technology, but it didn't need to be advanced. The weapons were positioned perfectly to catch the assault force in crossfire. The first wave of Krillian landing craft was destroyed before they could reach the surface. Dr. Alan Foster was in charge of the planetary defenses. He was a civilian scientist who had volunteered to stay on New Haven when the evacuation began. Foster had spent weeks studying Krillian tactics and preparing for this moment. He knew the defenses wouldn't stop the invasion, but they might buy enough time for something else. The something else was a plan so crazy that even Admiral Morrison had hesitated to approve it. The humans were going to turn New Haven's main power plant into a weapon. Foster had calculated that overloading the fusion reactor would create an explosion powerful enough to destroy everything within 50 kilometers. The power plant was located near the planet's main spaceport, where the Krillians planned to land their heavy equipment. If Foster could trigger the explosion at the right moment, he could cripple the invasion force. The only problem was that he would have to stay behind to manually control the timing. Zethkar watched as the evacuation of New Haven continued under impossible conditions. Human transport ships dodged enemy fire while loading civilians and essential equipment. The evacuation should have taken 3 days, but Admiral Morrison was determined to save as many people as possible. Colonel Ryan Davis commanded the ground forces defending the evacuation sites. He had less than 5,000 troops against a Krillian invasion force of 50,000. Davis knew he couldn't win a conventional battle, so he decided not to fight one. Instead of defending fixed positions, Davis spread his forces across the planet in small groups. They attacked Krillian supply lines, communication centers, and isolated units. The human soldiers used the planet's geography against the invaders, turning every building and street into a potential ambush site. Sergeant Maria Santos was one of Davis's best officers. She led a team of combat engineers who specialized in explosives and demolition. Santos spent the first week of the invasion mapping the underground tunnel system that connected New Haven's major cities. The tunnels had been built for the colony's transportation system, but Santos saw their military potential. Her teams modified the tunnels to create a hidden network that allowed human forces to move unseen across the planet. They could attack anywhere and disappear before the Krillians could respond. The guerrilla war on New Haven's surface was unlike anything the Krillians had experienced. Most species either surrendered immediately or fought conventional battles that could be won through superior firepower. The humans did neither. They made every meter of ground cost the invaders dearly. Santos and her teams began sabotaging critical infrastructure. They destroyed bridges, collapsed tunnels, and contaminated water supplies. The Krillians found themselves controlling empty buildings and useless facilities. Every victory was hollow because the humans had already stripped away anything valuable. The most disturbing tactic was how the humans used their own civilians. Instead of keeping them safely away from the fighting, human military units were hiding among refugee groups. Krillian soldiers never knew if they were approaching helpless civilians or disguised commandos. Dr. Foster waited at the power plant while the battle raged around him. He had rigged the fusion reactor with a manual override that would cause a massive overload. The explosion would destroy the facility and everything around it, including Foster himself. He seemed completely at peace with this sacrifice. Zethkar found himself disturbed by Foster's calm acceptance of death. Most species viewed individual survival as the highest priority. Even soldiers usually tried to live through battles if possible. The humans seemed to consider their own lives as just another resource to be used when necessary. The explosion came 3 weeks after the invasion began. Foster triggered the reactor overload, just as the main Krillian landing force approached the spaceport. The fusion blast vaporized the entire facility and left a crater 5 kilometers wide. Over 10,000 Krillian troops died in the explosion. General Vosak stared at the reports in disbelief. He had lost more troops taking New Haven than he had lost in his previous 10 campaigns combined. The planet was technically under Krillian control, but it was a poisoned victory. The humans had destroyed everything useful and left behind a radioactive wasteland. The evacuation of New Haven was finally complete, but it had taken 3 weeks instead of the planned 3 days. Admiral Morrison had managed to save over 90% of the population, along with critical industrial equipment. She had also extracted most of her military personnel for use in future battles. The cost of victory was enormous for the Krillians. They had lost 30 ships and over 15,000 troops to capture a planet that was now mostly useless. Worse, the human tactics were spreading to other worlds. Species that had been conquered by the Krillians were beginning to rebel using human-inspired guerrilla warfare. Zethkar updated his reports as he followed the human fleet to their next destination. The Battle of New Haven was officially a Krillian victory, but it felt like a defeat. The humans had lost their planet but gained something more valuable. They had learned how to fight the Krillians effectively. Admiral Morrison's fleet was now a mix of military vessels and converted civilian ships. Cargo freighters had been fitted with weapons and armor. Passenger liners had been turned into troop transports. Even small private craft were being used as scouts and messengers. The improvised nature of the human fleet bothered Zethkar. Most species maintained clear distinctions between military and civilian assets. The humans seemed to view everything as potential weapons. Their entire society was adapting to warfare in ways he had never observed before. Captain Sullivan, now commanding a converted cargo ship, had become something of a legend among human forces. His successful reactor ram attack at New Haven was being studied and copied by other captains. Human engineers were designing new ways to turn their ships into guided missiles. Lisa Park had been promoted to commander and was now in charge of tactical innovation. She had teams of scientists and engineers working around the clock to develop new weapons and strategies. The humans were evolving their military capabilities faster than any species Zethkar had ever observed. The most disturbing development was how quickly human society was militarizing. Civilian industries were being converted to militar 6 months after the Battle of New Haven. Zethkar received new orders from the High Council. What had started as a routine observation mission was now classified as a priority intelligence gathering operation. The war between humans and Krillians was not going according to anyone's predictions. The High Council wanted detailed reports on what they were calling the human anomaly. 3 Krillian battle fleets had been defeated in the past 4 months. Worse, human tactics were spreading to other species throughout the galaxy. The Council needed to understand how a primitive species was achieving such impossible victories. Zethkar moved his observation post to the Kepler system, where Admiral Morrison was preparing for the largest human offensive yet attempted. Intelligence reports showed that the humans had assembled a fleet of over 200 ships, but most of them were converted civilian vessels with improvised weapons and armor. The target was a major Krillian naval base at Kepler Prime. The base controlled shipping routes to 6 different star systems and housed over 50,000 Krillian troops. It was protected by 3 defensive fleets and orbital weapon platforms that could destroy any attacking force. Captain Ben Hughes now commanded a battle group consisting entirely of converted freighters and passenger ships. His flagship was a former grain transport that had been fitted with nuclear missile launchers and heavy armor plating. The ship looked ridiculous compared to proper military vessels, but Zethkar had learned not to underestimate human ingenuity. Hughes had developed new tactics that turned the weaknesses of civilian ships into advantages. Cargo vessels could carry much larger missile loads than military ships. Passenger liners had better life support systems that allowed crews to survive longer battles. Even small private craft were useful as expendable scouts and decoys. The human attack on Kepler Prime began with something Zethkar had never seen before. Instead of approaching the target directly, the human fleet scattered across the entire star system. Individual ships and small groups began attacking minor Krillian facilities throughout the system. Commander Nina Cross led a squadron of converted mining ships in attacks on Krillian supply depots. The mining vessels were slow and poorly armed, but they carried industrial equipment that could cut through station hulls like paper. Cross used mining lasers and demolition charges to destroy facilities that the Krillians considered safe from attack. The scattered attacks forced the Krillians to divide their defensive forces. Ships that should have been protecting Kepler Prime were sent to deal with human raiders throughout the system. By the time the Krillians realized what was happening, their main defenses had been weakened. Major Pete Walker commanded a special operations unit that specialized in capturing enemy technology. His teams used small, fast ships to board damaged Krillian vessels and steal whatever they could find. Within weeks, human engineers were reverse engineering Krillian weapons and incorporating them into their own ships. The technology theft was more than just practical. It was psychological warfare on a level that disturbed Zethkar. The humans weren't just defeating Krillian forces. They were stealing their technological advantages and using them against their creators. The message was clear. Nothing the Krillians had was safe from human innovation. Walker's teams also began a new type of sabotage. Instead of simply destroying Krillian equipment, they modified it to malfunction at critical moments. Krillian ships would suffer mysterious system failures during battle. Weapon platforms would suddenly turn on their own forces. The paranoia and confusion spread throughout the Krillian military. The main assault on Kepler Prime came after 2 weeks of scattered attacks. Admiral Morrison led a coordinated strike with over 100 ships. But the attack was unlike any conventional battle Zethkar had observed. The humans didn't try to defeat the orbital defenses. Instead, they simply ignored them. The human fleet approached Kepler Prime in a tight formation that looked like a traditional attack run. The Krillian defenses opened fire with everything they had, expecting to destroy the attacking force before it could reach the station. But at the last moment, the human ships scattered in all directions. Most of the human vessels were decoys filled with sensor reflectors and electronic warfare equipment. The real attack force consisted of small, fast ships that had been hidden among the decoys. These ships used the chaos of the defensive barrage to slip past the orbital weapons and attack the station directly. Captain Sullivan, now commanding a specially modified assault ship, led the boarding action. His vessel was designed to ram directly into enemy stations and deploy troops through the hole it created. Sullivan's ship punched through the station's outer hull and disgorged 200 human Marines into the heart of the Krillian base. The fighting inside Kepler Prime was brutal and chaotic. The humans used their knowledge of station layouts, stolen from previous raids, to move quickly through the facility. They targeted life support systems, command centers, and weapon control rooms. Within hours, the massive station was under human control. But the humans didn't just capture Kepler Prime. They turned it into a weapon. Engineer teams quickly modified the station's defensive systems to target Krillian relief forces. When the 3 defensive fleets returned to retake their base, They found themselves under attack from their own orbital weapons. Zethkar watched in growing unease as the humans demonstrated their mastery of psychological warfare. They broadcast messages to the attacking Krillian fleets that contained detailed information about every Krillian casualty from the past 6 months. The humans had been keeping precise records of enemy dead and were using them to demoralize their opponents. The messages weren't just casualty reports. They included personal information about dead Krillian soldiers, their families, and their military records. The humans somehow knew intimate details about Krillian society and were using that knowledge as a weapon. The psychological impact on Krillian morale was devastating. Commander Lisa Park, now Admiral Morrison's chief tactical officer, had developed a network of alien contacts who provided intelligence about Krillian culture and society. Many of these contacts were from species that the Krillians had conquered or oppressed. The humans were turning the Krillian Empire's own victims against them. The intelligence network was more than just a military asset. It was changing how humans thought about warfare. They were learning that defeating an enemy required understanding their psychology, their culture, and their deepest fears. War was becoming a form of science for the humans. Dr. Sarah Kim, a human psychologist who had volunteered for military service, was studying Krillian prisoners and defectors. Her research was revealing weaknesses in Krillian society that could be exploited. Kim's work was being used to develop new forms of psychological warfare that targeted specific aspects of Krillian culture. The most disturbing development was how quickly other species were adopting human tactics. The humans freely shared their innovations with anyone who opposed the Krillians. Within months, guerrilla warfare and psychological operations were spreading across the galaxy like a virus. Zethkar received reports from other observers who were documenting similar changes in their assigned sectors. Species that had been peaceful for centuries were suddenly developing aggressive military capabilities. The human approach to warfare was fundamentally changing galactic civilization. The Battle of Kepler Prime ended with complete human victory, but the aftermath was more significant than the battle itself. The humans didn't just hold the captured base, they turned it into a training center, where they taught their tactics to representatives from dozens of other species. Admiral Morrison established what she called the Liberation Academy at Kepler Prime. Officers from oppressed worlds came to learn human military doctrine and psychological warfare techniques. The Academy was producing a new generation of military leaders who understood how to fight asymmetric campaigns. Captain Hughes was appointed as the Academy's chief instructor for naval tactics. He taught courses on converting civilian vessels into warships, using improvised weapons and turning defensive weaknesses into offensive advantages. His students returned to their homeworlds with knowledge that transformed their military capabilities. The Krillian Empire was beginning to fracture under the pressure of constant rebellions and guerrilla warfare. Worlds that had been peacefully occupied for centuries were suddenly rising in revolt. The Krillians were discovering that their traditional methods of control were useless against populations that had learned human tactics. Zethkar updated his reports with growing concern. The war was no longer just between humans and Krillians. It had become a galactic revolution that was changing the fundamental nature of interstellar conflict. The humans weren't just winning battles, they were transforming warfare itself. The most troubling aspect was how the humans themselves were changing. They were becoming more militarized, more aggressive, and more focused on warfare as a solution to problems. Their entire civilization was adapting to become more effective at combat and conflict. Young humans were growing up in a society where military service was the highest honor and tactical innovation was the most valued skill. Their entertainment, their education, and their culture were all. 1 year into the war, Zethkar was reassigned to observe the broader conflict zone. The human-Krillian war had spread across 17 star systems and involved over 40 different species. What had started as a simple territorial dispute was now reshaping the political structure of an entire galactic sector. The High Council was no longer asking for routine observation reports. They wanted strategic analysis and threat assessments. 3 council members had privately asked Zethkar whether the humans posed a long-term danger to galactic stability. He wasn't sure how to answer that question. Admiral Morrison had been promoted to Supreme Commander of what the humans called the Liberation Coalition. Her forces now included ships and personnel from 23 different species, all united by their opposition to Krillian expansion. The Coalition fleet had grown to over 800 vessels, but Zethkar noticed that while the Coalition was technically multi-species, it was fundamentally human in character. Human officers held most of the senior positions. Human tactical doctrine was used throughout the fleet. Human psychological warfare techniques had been adopted by every member species. Captain Ben Hughes now commanded an entire battle group that consisted of ships from 6 different species. His flagship was a captured Krillian dreadnought that had been extensively modified with human and alien technology. The ship represented everything that disturbed Zethkar about human warfare. The hybrid vessel combined the best weapons and defenses from multiple civilizations, but it was designed according to human tactical principles. It could fight like a traditional warship when necessary, but it was also equipped with ramming spikes, boarding pods, and self-destruct systems. Every human ship was now a potential guided missile. Hughes had also pioneered new combined arms tactics that used the unique capabilities of different species. Aquatic aliens served as damage control teams because they could survive in flooded compartments. Silicon-based lifeforms worked in the ship's reactor cores because they were immune to radiation. Each species was used for what they did best. The integration went beyond simple cooperation. Human engineers were studying alien biology and technology to develop new weapons and defenses. They had created atmospheric weapons that targeted specific alien respiratory systems. They had developed computer viruses that exploited particular alien logical patterns. Commander Nina Cross had been put in charge of intelligence operations for the entire coalition. Her network of informants and saboteurs now extended throughout Krillian space and beyond. Cross had become one of the most feared individuals in the galaxy, though few people had ever seen her face. Cross's intelligence operations were more sophisticated than anything Zethkar had observed in 3 centuries of galactic politics. She had agents embedded in Krillian command structures, alien governments, and even neutral trading organizations. Her network could predict enemy movements weeks in advance. The psychological warfare campaigns had become equally sophisticated. Dr. Sarah Kim now led a team of psychologists, anthropologists, and cultural specialists from dozens of species. They studied enemy societies and developed targeted propaganda that exploited specific cultural vulnerabilities. Kim's team had created separate psychological warfare campaigns for different Krillian subspecies. They had identified generational conflicts within Krillian society and were exploiting them to create internal dissent. They had even developed techniques to turn Krillian religious beliefs against their military leadership. The most disturbing development was how the humans were changing their own society to support the war effort. Zethkar had observed many militarized civilizations, but the humans were doing something different. They weren't just mobilizing for war. They were evolving into a warrior culture. Human children were now educated in military academies from an early age. Their curriculum included tactics, weapons training, and psychological warfare alongside traditional subjects. Play activities were designed to develop strategic thinking and aggressive instincts. The humans were literally breeding a generation of warriors. Human entertainment had completely shifted to focus on military themes. Their movies, books, and games all celebrated warfare and tactical innovation. Human art now glorified sacrifice, courage, and victory over impossible odds. Their entire cultural identity was becoming defined by their military capabilities. The economic transformation was equally dramatic. Human civilian industries had been completely converted to military production. Factories that once made consumer goods now produced weapons and ship components. Agricultural worlds were growing military supplies instead of luxury foods. But the humans weren't just mobilizing existing resources. They were developing entirely new industries based on captured alien technology. Human reverse engineering. Capabilities had advanced to the point where they could improve upon alien designs within months of acquiring them. Major Pete Walker's technology acquisition teams had become the most successful intelligence operation in the war. They had stolen or captured examples of every major weapon system in use by the Krillians and their allies. Human factories were now producing improved versions of alien military technology. The improved alien weapons were then shared freely with coalition members, creating a technological arms race that favored the humans and their allies. Species that had been technologically inferior to the Krillians suddenly found themselves With access to advanced weapons and defenses, Zethkar observed a battle in the Proxima system where human technological integration was displayed in its most advanced form. Captain Sullivan, now commanding a battle squadron, led an attack against a heavily fortified Krillian stronghold using a fleet of hybrid vessels. Sullivan's ships combined human mobility with alien firepower and defenses. His flagship used Krillian energy shields, Voltan particle weapons, and Nexus stealth technology, all integrated with human tactical systems. The vessel could adapt to any combat situation by switching between different technological configurations. The battle itself demonstrated how human tactical doctrine had evolved beyond simple innovation. Sullivan's forces used coordinated attacks that simultaneously targeted enemy weapons, sensors, life support, and morale. Every aspect of the engagement was designed to achieve maximum psychological as well as physical damage. The Krillian commander, Admiral Tekvar, was one of their most experienced officers. He had fought the humans in 4 previous battles and considered himself an expert on their tactics. But Sullivan's attack used strategies that Tekvar had never encountered before. The human fleet approached the Krillian stronghold using a formation that looked like a standard assault pattern. But as the battle developed, Sullivan's ships began using tactics borrowed from species throughout the galaxy. They fought like raiders, then like disciplined fleet units, then like desperate guerrillas, all within the same engagement. The rapid tactical shifts kept the Krillian defenders off balance and prevented them from developing effective countermeasures. Every time Tekvar thought he understood the human attack pattern, Sullivan would switch to a completely different approach. The most devastating moment came when Sullivan's forces appeared to retreat after suffering heavy casualties. Tekvar ordered pursuit, thinking he had finally defeated the humans in a conventional engagement. But the retreat was a trap that drew the Krillian fleet into a carefully prepared ambush. Hidden human ships emerged from the system's asteroid belt and attacked the pursuing Krillians from behind. At the same time, Sullivan's retreating forces turned and resumed their assault. The Krillian fleet found itself caught between 2 human forces and subjected to crossfire from multiple directions. Admiral Tekvar's flagship was captured rather than destroyed. Human boarding teams had developed techniques for taking enemy vessels intact, along with their crews and equipment. The captured admiral would be interrogated using psychological techniques that were specifically designed for Krillian psychology. The interrogation would reveal not just tactical information, but cultural and psychological intelligence that would be used in future operations. The humans had learned that understanding their enemies was as important as defeating them. Every captured officer became a source of information about enemy society and military doctrine. Zethkar realized that the humans were not just winning the war through superior tactics and technology. They were systematically learning everything they could about their enemies and using that knowledge to develop new methods of warfare. Each battle made them more dangerous than they had been before. The Battle of Proxima System ended with complete human victory and the capture of a major Krillian stronghold. But the significance went beyond the tactical success. The humans had demonstrated their ability to coordinate complex operations involving multiple species and advanced hybrid technology. The captured stronghold was immediately converted into a research facility where human scientists studied captured Krillian technology and prisoners. Within weeks, the facility was producing new weapons based on Krillian designs, but improved with human modifications and alien components. The research was shared throughout the coalition, creating a feedback loop of technological innovation that accelerated with each victory. The humans were not just defeating their enemies. They were absorbing their capabilities and making them better. As Zethkar prepped 18 months into the war, Zethkar received the most disturbing intelligence report of his career. The humans were no longer just fighting the Krillian Empire. They were actively seeking out conflict with other species to test and improve their military capabilities. War had become their primary method of technological and social development. Admiral Morrison, now commanding over 1,500 ships from 40 different species, had established what she called training conflicts with minor powers throughout the sector. These weren't defensive wars or territorial disputes. They were carefully planned military exercises using real enemies and live ammunition. The humans would identify a species with interesting military technology or tactics. then engineer a conflict that would justify military action. The resulting wars were short and decisive, ending with human victory and the acquisition of new weapons, techniques, or allies. Captain Ben Hughes led one such training conflict against the hegemony of Keth, a militant species known for their advanced missile technology. The war lasted only 3 weeks, but it provided the humans with detailed intelligence about Keth weapon systems and tactical doctrine. The Keth were not evil or aggressive toward human interests. They were simply a convenient target for testing new human weapons and strategies. Hughes approached the conflict as a scientific experiment, carefully documenting the effectiveness of different tactics and technologies. The war ended with the Keth government's complete surrender and their integration into the Liberation Coalition. Their missile technology was immediately shared throughout the human fleet, and their military officers were sent to human training academies to learn coalition tactical doctrine. Zethkar realized that the humans had developed a system for continuous military improvement that required constant warfare. They couldn't maintain their rapid technological and tactical advancement without regular conflicts to test new ideas and acquire new capabilities. Commander Nina Cross had evolved her intelligence operations into something that resembled a galactic conspiracy. Her agents were embedded in governments throughout the known galaxy, gathering intelligence and manipulating political situations to create opportunities for human military intervention. Cross's network could predict which species would develop useful military technology months before it became available. They could identify political instabilities that might lead to conflicts. Most disturbing of all, they could create such instabilities when convenient opportunities didn't arise naturally. The humans were no longer waiting for threats to emerge. They were actively engineering situations that would justify military action and provide opportunities for testing and improvement. War had become their primary tool for exploration, diplomacy, and technological development. Dr. Sarah Kim's Psychological Warfare Division had grown into something that resembled a university department dedicated to studying galactic civilization. Her teams were mapping the psychology, culture, and social structures of every known species with a thoroughness that impressed even Zethkar. Kim's research went far beyond military applications. The humans were developing a comprehensive understanding of galactic civilization that would allow them to predict and manipulate the behavior of entire species. Their knowledge was becoming a weapon more powerful than any starship or missile. The most disturbing aspect of Kim's work was how it was changing human society. Her psychological techniques were being used internally to optimize human military effectiveness and social cohesion. The humans were applying their understanding of alien psychology to modify their own culture. Human children were now raised using psychological conditioning techniques that enhanced their natural aggression and tactical thinking. Their education system was designed to produce individuals who thought about every problem in military terms. Human society was becoming a weapon aimed at the galaxy. Major Pete Walker's technology acquisition program had evolved into a systematic effort to steal or capture every advanced technology in known space. His teams operated throughout the galaxy, targeting not just enemies but neutral powers and even potential allies. Walker's operations were justified as preventive acquisition, taking dangerous technologies before they could be used against the coalition. But Zethkar could see that the real goal was to ensure human technological superiority over all other species, regardless of their political relationships. The technology theft was accompanied by systematic sabotage of research and development programs throughout the galaxy. Human agents would infiltrate alien research facilities and either steal promising technologies or sabotage projects that might threaten human advantages. The result was a gradual concentration of advanced technology in human hands and a corresponding decline in the technological capabilities of other species. The humans were not just advancing their own capabilities. They were actively preventing other species from developing competing technologies. Captain Sullivan, now commanding an entire fleet sector, had begun experimenting with what he called total warfare, conflicts designed to completely destroy enemy civilizations rather than simply defeating their military forces. His campaigns targeted enemy infrastructure, culture, and breeding populations. Sullivan's total warfare campaigns were justified as necessary measures against particularly dangerous enemies. But Zethkar could see that they were actually testing grounds for techniques that could be used against any species that threatened human interests. The humans were developing the capability to wage genocidal warfare with surgical precision. They could target specific genetic markers, cultural practices, or social structures to eliminate threats without causing unnecessary collateral damage to useful resources or populations. The Battle of Vega Prime demonstrated the culmination of human military evolution. Admiral Morrison led a coalition fleet of 2,000 ships against the last major Krillian stronghold. But the battle was less important than what it revealed about human military doctrine. The human attack wasn't designed to capture Vega Prime or defeat the Krillian defenders. It was designed to test every weapon, tactic, and psychological technique the humans had developed over the past 18 months. The battle was a comprehensive examination of human military capabilities. Morrison's forces attacked the Krillian stronghold using simultaneous assaults from 50 different directions. Each attack used different weapons, tactics, and coalition species. The humans were testing which combinations were most effective against different types of defenses. The Krillian defenders, led by Supreme Commander Kesistak, fought with desperate courage but were completely overwhelmed by the diversity and sophistication of the human assault. Every time they adapted to one type of attack, a completely different assault would begin from another direction. The battle lasted 6 days, not because the humans needed that much time to achieve victory, but because they wanted to test as many different scenarios as possible. Different parts of the human fleet practiced different types of warfare against the same enemy stronghold. The psychological warfare component was particularly sophisticated. Kim's teams broadcast targeted propaganda that exploited specific weaknesses in Krillian psychology, while simultaneously studying Krillian responses to different types of psychological pressure. The humans were using the battle as a real-time laboratory for testing psychological weapons. They would broadcast a specific type of propaganda, measure its effectiveness, then modify their approach and test again. The Krillian defenders were unwitting subjects in a massive psychological experiment. When Vega Prime finally fell, the humans had gathered detailed data about the effectiveness of dozens of different weapons, tactics, and psychological techniques. The battle was militarily unnecessary but scientifically invaluable for improving human military doctrine. The captured Krillian facilities were immediately converted into research centers where human scientists studied every aspect of Krillian technology, culture, and biology. Within months, the humans understood Krillian civilization better than the Krillians understood themselves. Supreme Commander Kestak was kept alive for extensive interrogation, using psychological techniques specifically designed for his individual personality profile. The information extracted from him was used to develop new methods for controlling and manipulating Krillian populations. Zethkar realized that the humans had developed a form of warfare that was fundamentally different from anything he had observed before. They weren't just fighting to win conflicts. They were using warfare as a tool for continuous improvement and expansion of their capabilities. Every battle made the humans stronger, smarter, and more dangerous. They absorbed the best qualities of their enemies while eliminating threats to their own development. War had become their primary method of evolution as a species. The most disturbing realization was that the humans no longer needed external enemies to drive their military development. They had created a system that could generate its own conflicts and opportunities for growth. They had become a self-improving war machine. As Zethkar prepared his report on the Battle of Vega Prime, he struggled with the implications of what he had observed. The humans had won the war against the Krillians, but they had also fundamentally changed the nature of Galactic. 2 years after receiving his original assignment, Zethkar faced a crisis that would define the rest of his existence. The High Council had summoned him to present his findings about the human threat, but he was no longer sure which side he should support. The humans had become something unprecedented in galactic history, and their victory over the Krillians was now inevitable. The final phase of the war had begun with humanity's assault on the Krillian homeworld of HFY Prime. Admiral Morrison, now commanding a coalition fleet of over 3,000 ships, approached the heavily defended system with tactics that defied every principle of conventional warfare. Instead of a direct assault, Morrison's forces spent 6 months systematically destroying every Krillian outpost, Supply depot and communication relay within 50 light-years of the homeworld. They weren't trying to capture territory. They were isolating Kessevar Prime from the rest of the galaxy. Captain Ben Hughes led the economic warfare campaign that preceded the military assault. His forces targeted civilian shipping, industrial facilities, and trade routes throughout Krillian space. The goal wasn't destruction but capture and conversion of Krillian economic assets to support the coalition war effort. Hughes's economic warfare was more devastating than traditional military attacks. By capturing rather than destroying Krillian facilities, the humans gained access to industrial capacity while denying it to their enemies. The Krillian economy collapsed months before their military defenses were seriously challenged. The psychological preparation for the final assault was equally systematic. Dr. Sarah Kim's propaganda. Teams had spent 2 years mapping Krillian society and culture. They understood Krillian psychology better than most Krillians understood themselves. Kim's teams began broadcasting targeted messages to different segments of Krillian society 6 months before the military assault began. They exploited generational conflicts, class tensions, and regional rivalries within the Krillian Empire. By the time human ships appeared in their system, Krillian society was already fracturing from internal dissent. Commander Nina Cross had infiltrated the highest levels of Krillian government and military command. Her agents provided detailed intelligence about Krillian defensive plans, troop movements, and command decisions. The humans knew what the Krillians were going to do before the Krillians made their final decisions. But Cross's intelligence operations went beyond simple espionage. Her agents actively manipulated Krillian decision-making by providing false information, creating confusion, and exploiting personal rivalries among Krillian leaders. The Krillian defense was being sabotaged from within. Major Pete Walker's technology acquisition teams had captured examples of every advanced weapon system the Krillians possessed. Human factories were producing improved versions of Krillian technology months before the final battle began. The defenders would face their own weapons turned against them. The technological advantage was overwhelming, but the humans weren't satisfied with simple superiority. They had developed new weapons specifically designed to exploit weaknesses in Krillian biology and psychology. Every aspect of the assault was customized for maximum effectiveness against this particular enemy. Captain Sullivan commanded the advance force that established a beachhead in the Kessevar system. His ships used a combination of stealth technology, electronic warfare, and psychological operations to penetrate the outer defenses without triggering a general alarm. Sullivan's forces didn't announce their presence with massive attacks. Instead, they quietly disabled communication systems, sabotaged automated defenses, and began broadcasting psychological warfare messages. The Krillian defenders discovered they were under attack only when their defenses began turning on each other. The main assault began with Admiral Morrison's personal intervention in Krillian command communications. Her teams had studied Krillian military protocol so thoroughly that they could impersonate high-ranking Krillian officers. Morrison herself gave orders to Krillian units using perfect military terminology and command authority. The confusion created by false orders and impersonated communications was devastating. Krillian defensive units received contradictory instructions, were ordered to abandon strategic positions, and were directed to attack their own allies. The Krillian command structure collapsed before the real fighting even began. General Chris Taylor led the ground assault on Kessevar, Prime using tactics that combined traditional military operations with advanced psychological warfare. His forces didn't just attack Krillian military installations. They systematically dismantled Krillian society while offering generous terms to individual defenders who surrendered. Taylor's ground forces were accompanied by teams of psychologists, anthropologists, and cultural specialists who understood exactly how to break Krillian resistance. They offered surrendering Krillians not just safety, but improved living conditions and opportunities for advancement within the new order. The surrender offers were more effective than military attacks. Krillian units that might have fought to the death against traditional enemies surrendered readily when offered genuine benefits for cooperation. The humans had learned that understanding their enemies was more powerful than simply defeating them. The final battle for the Krillian government complex was almost anticlimactic. Krillian Supreme Leader Thakmor found himself isolated and abandoned by his own forces. His personal guard had been corrupted by human psychological operations. His communication systems had been compromised by Cross's agents. Thakmor's surrender was broadcast throughout the galaxy using Krillian communication networks that had been captured intact. The message wasn't just an admission of defeat. It was a detailed explanation of why the Krillian Empire had failed and why cooperation with the human coalition offered the best future for all Krillian citizens. Zethkar watched the surrender broadcast with growing unease. The humans hadn't just defeated the Krillian Empire, they had absorbed it. Krillian technology, personnel, and resources were being integrated into the human coalition with efficiency that suggested this had been planned from the beginning. The integration process was more sophisticated than simple conquest. The humans had studied Krillian society so thoroughly that they could offer each segment of the population exactly what they needed to accept human leadership. They weren't ruling through force but through comprehensive understanding of their subjects' motivations. Former Krillian military officers were offered positions in the coalition fleet. Krillian scientists were invited to join human research programs. Krillian industrial workers were promised better working conditions and higher wages. Every group was given reasons to support the new order. Admiral Morrison's post-victory speech was broadcast to every world in the former Krillian Empire. She didn't speak as a conqueror, but as a liberator who had freed the Krillian people from their own oppressive government. Her message was carefully crafted to appeal to Krillian psychology and cultural values. Morrison announced that the former Krillian Empire would be reorganized as autonomous sectors within the Liberation Coalition. Krillian worlds would be governed by Krillian administrators working within coalition guidelines. The transition would be gradual and respectful of local customs and traditions. But Zethkar could see the reality behind the diplomatic language. The humans were implementing a system of control that was more effective than traditional military occupation. They were making their former enemies want to be ruled by human authority. The human victory was complete, but what disturbed Zethkar most was how efficiently they had achieved it. The final campaign had lasted only 8 months from beginning to end. The humans had developed military capabilities that could destroy any resistance in the galaxy. More troubling was the systematic way the humans had approached the problem. They hadn't just won a war. They had created a template for conquering any civilization they encountered. Every aspect of their campaign could be adapted and applied to future conflicts. The technology acquisition, psychological manipulation, economic warfare, and social engineering techniques the humans had developed could be used against any species. They had created a formula for total victory that could be applied universally. Zethkar realized that the human victory over the Krillians was just the beginning. The humans now possessed the knowledge, technology, and organizational systems needed to dominate the entire galaxy. The only question was whether they would choose to use these capabilities. As he prepared his final report for the High Council, Zethkar struggled with the most important decision of his career. Should he warn the galaxy about the human threat, or should he recommend accommodation with what might be an unstoppable force? The humans had demonstrated that they could defeat any military opposition, corrupt any government, and manipulate any society. Traditional forms of resistance would be useless against their comprehensive understanding of galactic civilization, but they had also shown that they could be benevolent rulers who offered genuine benefits to those who cooperated with them. The former Krillian worlds were already experiencing improvements in living standards, technological development, and social freedom under human administration. Zethkar faced a choice between warning the galaxy about a potential threat or accepting that the humans might represent the future of galactic civility. 5 years after his assignment began, Zethkar stood before the full assembly of the High Council of Worlds. His report had been classified at the highest security levels, and his briefing would determine how the galaxy's most powerful civilizations responded to the human emergence. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on him as he began his presentation. The council chamber was filled with representatives from 47 different species, each representing civilizations that had existed for thousands of years. They had gathered to hear about a species that had achieved galactic dominance in less than 5 years of active warfare. Honored council members, Zethkar began, I have observed something unprecedented in galactic history. The humans have not simply won a war against the Krillian Empire. They have fundamentally changed the nature of interstellar civilization, and we must decide how to respond to this transformation. The first part of his presentation covered the military aspects of human capabilities. He showed detailed analysis of human tactical innovations, technological adaptation, and strategic planning. The numbers were impressive enough, but they didn't capture the true scope of the human transformation. Admiral Morrison had restructured the former Krillian Empire into what she called the Galactic Liberation Coalition. The organization controlled over 200 star systems and included 63 different species. It was the largest political entity in known space, and it continued to grow through voluntary membership rather than conquest. The coalition's military capabilities were beyond anything the galaxy had seen before. Captain Ben Hughes now commanded a fleet of over 5,000 ships representing an integration of technologies from dozens of different civilizations. The combined fleet was more powerful than any 10 traditional galactic powers, but the military strength was only part of the story. Commander Nina Cross had developed an intelligence network that extended throughout civilized space. Her agents operated within every major government, military organization, and commercial enterprise in the galaxy. The humans knew more about galactic civilization than anyone else. The intelligence network wasn't just gathering information. It was actively shaping political and economic developments throughout the galaxy. Cross's agents influenced elections, manipulated trade agreements, and guided scientific research in directions that benefited human interests. Dr. Sarah Kim's psychological research had evolved into a comprehensive science of civilizational behavior. Her teams could predict how entire species would respond to specific political, economic, or military pressures. They had mapped the psychology of galactic civilization with scientific precision. Kim's work was being used to develop what the humans called peaceful integration strategies. These were systematic methods for encouraging other species to voluntarily join the coalition through a combination of economic incentives, cultural appeal, and psychological manipulation. The integration strategies were remarkably effective. Over 20 species had joined the coalition without any military pressure or coercion. They had been convinced that membership offered them better opportunities for development and security than independent existence. Major Pete Walker's technology acquisition program had evolved into something that resembled a galactic research and development corporation. His teams were no longer stealing alien technology. They were actively collaborating with alien scientists to develop new innovations that benefited all coalition members. The collaborative research was producing technological advances at an unprecedented rate. New weapons, faster ships, better communication systems, and improved manufacturing techniques were being developed and shared throughout the coalition. The technological gap between coalition and non-coalition worlds was growing rapidly. Captain Sullivan had been appointed as the coalition's diplomatic enforcement officer, a position that didn't exist in traditional galactic politics. His job was to resolve conflicts between coalition members and external powers through a combination of negotiation, intimidation, and targeted military action. Sullivan's diplomatic enforcement was more effective than traditional diplomacy because it was backed by overwhelming military capability and comprehensive intelligence about the motivations of all parties involved. Most disputes were resolved before they could escalate to serious conflicts. General Chris Taylor commanded the coalition's integration forces, military units specifically designed to help new member species adapt to coalition membership. These forces weren't occupying armies but rather advisors and administrators who helped new members restructure their governments and militaries according to coalition standards. The integration process was voluntary but comprehensive. New coalition members received immediate access to advanced technology, expanded trade opportunities, and protection from external threats. In return, they accepted coalition guidance on military doctrine, political structure, and social organization. Seth Carr paused in his presentation to address the question that he knew was foremost in the Council's collective mind. The critical issue, he said, is not whether the humans pose a threat to galactic stability. They clearly have the capability to dominate or destroy any civilization they choose to target. The question is whether they will choose to use that capability aggressively. The evidence suggested that the humans preferred integration to conquest. They had demonstrated that they could achieve their goals through persuasion and cooperation more efficiently than through force. But they had also shown that they possessed unlimited capacity for violence when cooperation was refused. The former Krillian worlds provided the best example of human administrative capabilities. Under coalition management, these worlds had experienced rapid improvements in living standards, technological development, and social freedom. The transition from Krillian rule to coalition membership had been remarkably smooth. But the improvements came with a price. Coalition member worlds accepted human oversight of their military forces, intelligence services, and strategic industries. They maintained local autonomy in domestic affairs but surrendered control over anything that might affect galactic security or stability. The Coalition's expansion strategy was based on offering better alternatives rather than threatening destruction. They approached potential new members with detailed proposals that demonstrated how Coalition membership would benefit their specific civilization. The offers were usually too attractive to refuse. Non-coalition worlds were not directly threatened, but they were gradually isolated from galactic trade and communication networks that were increasingly dominated by coalition members. Independent civilizations found themselves unable to compete economically or technologically with coalition worlds. The psychological pressure was subtle but effective. Independent civilizations could see that their neighbors were prospering under coalition membership while they struggled with technological stagnation and economic isolation. The choice between independence and prosperity was becoming increasingly clear. Zethkar presented classified intelligence about human internal discussions regarding galactic expansion. The humans were not planning aggressive conquest of the remaining independent worlds. Instead, they were confident that economic and technological pressure would eventually convince most civilizations to join voluntarily. The human leadership understood that forced conquest would create resentment and resistance that would require constant military suppression. Voluntary membership created genuine loyalty and eliminated the need for occupation forces. The humans had learned that cooperation was more efficient than coercion, but the intelligence also revealed that the humans were prepared to use military force against any civilization that posed a genuine threat to coalition security. They had developed contingency plans for dealing with every major galactic power, and their capabilities were sufficient to implement those plans successfully. The most disturbing revelation in Zethkar's report was how completely the humans understood galactic civilization. They had studied every species, analyzed every government, and mapped every important economic and political relationship. Their knowledge was comprehensive and their planning was meticulous. The humans were not making random decisions or reacting to immediate circumstances. They were implementing a carefully planned strategy for reshaping galactic civilization according to their vision of optimal organization. Every action was calculated to advance their long-term goals. Admiral Morrison's public statements about coalition goals were consistent and reassuring. She spoke about creating a galaxy-wide civilization based on voluntary cooperation, mutual benefit, and peaceful development. Her vision was appealing to many species who were tired of constant conflicts and political instability. But Zethkar had observed the humans long enough to understand that their definitions of cooperation and peace were different from traditional galactic concepts. The humans believed that their way of organizing civilization was objectively superior, and they were committed to spreading that organization throughout the galaxy. The Coalition's success in integrating diverse species and cultures was undeniable. Former enemies were working together productively. Trade and communication were more efficient than they had. 10 years after his original assignment, Zethkar submitted his final report and requested retirement from the Galactic Observation Corps. The request was granted immediately, though he suspected it had less to do with his service record and more to do with what he had witnessed. The High Council wanted him to disappear quietly, taking his disturbing knowledge with him. The galaxy had changed beyond recognition during his decade of observation. The Galactic Liberation Coalition now included over 300 star systems and 78 different species. Admiral Morrison had been elected as the Coalition's first Supreme Chancellor in what outside observers called the most carefully orchestrated political campaign in galactic history. The election had been technically democratic, with representatives from all coalition member species participating in the vote. But Zethkar had observed the psychological preparation that preceded the election. Dr. Sarah Kim's teams had spent 2 years conditioning coalition populations to view Morrison as the natural choice for leadership. The conditioning wasn't crude propaganda but sophisticated cultural manipulation. Morrison appeared in entertainment media, educational materials, and news reports in contexts that associated her with success, wisdom, and benevolent authority. By the time of the election, voting for her felt like the obvious choice to most coalition citizens. Captain Ben Hughes had been promoted to Fleet Admiral and placed in command of all coalition military forces. His fleet now numbered over 10,000 ships and included vessels from dozens of different civilizations. The technological integration had reached the point where individual ships combined components from 8 or 10 different species. The integrated technology was producing capabilities that exceeded anything in galactic history. Coalition ships could travel faster, fight longer, and operate in more dangerous environments than any previous vessels. The military advantage over non-coalition forces was becoming insurmountable. But Hughes wasn't using his overwhelming military advantage to conquer the remaining independent worlds. Instead, he was demonstrating coalition capabilities through carefully orchestrated training exercises and security operations that showed potential opponents exactly what they would face if they chose to resist. The demonstrations were more effective than actual threats. Independent civilizations could see that resistance was hopeless without the coalition actually threatening them. The psychological pressure created by superior capability was more persuasive than any military ultimatum. Commander Nina Cross had been appointed as the coalition's Director of Information Services, a position that gave her authority over intelligence gathering, communication networks, and cultural development throughout coalition space. Her influence extended far beyond traditional espionage into the realm of civilizational guidance. Cross's information services weren't just gathering intelligence about external threats. They were actively shaping the development of coalition society by controlling the flow of information, encouraging certain types of research, and promoting cultural values that supported coalition goals. The information control was subtle but comprehensive. Coalition citizens had access to more information than ever before, but the information was carefully selected and presented to support coalition values and objectives. Alternative viewpoints weren't censored but were marginalized through sophisticated media manipulation. Major Pete Walker had been promoted to Director of Technological Development and was overseeing the most ambitious research program in galactic history. His teams were working on projects that would give the coalition capabilities that bordered on science fiction, even by advanced galactic standards. The research included faster-than-light communication systems, matter conversion technology, and artificial intelligence systems that could manage entire planetary economies. Walker's teams were also developing weapons that could destroy star systems and defenses that could protect planets from stellar-level attacks. The technological development was accelerating rapidly as more species joined the coalition and contributed their expertise to joint research projects. The rate of innovation was exceeding the ability of independent civilizations to keep pace, creating an ever-widening gap in capabilities. Captain Sullivan had been appointed as the coalition's ambassador to independent worlds, a diplomatic position that involved traveling throughout non-coalition space and offering membership to civilizations that were ready to join. His success rate was remarkably high, though Zethkar suspected this had more to do with preparation than persuasion. Sullivan's diplomatic missions were preceded by extensive intelligence gathering and psychological analysis of target civilizations. By the time he arrived to make membership offers, his teams understood exactly what arguments would be most effective with specific species and individuals. The membership offers were becoming increasingly attractive as the coalition's capabilities expanded. New members received immediate access to advanced technology, expanded trade opportunities, and protection from external threats. The benefits of membership were growing while the advantages of independence were shrinking. General Chris Taylor had been promoted to Director of Integration Services and was overseeing the process by which new coalition members adapted to their changed circumstances. His organization helped new members restructure their governments, retrain their military forces, and integrate their economies with coalition standards. The integration process was voluntary but comprehensive. New coalition members maintained local autonomy in domestic affairs, but accepted coalition oversight in areas that affected galactic security and stability. The transition was usually completed within 5 years of membership approval. The integration was so successful that former coalition members rarely expressed regret about joining. Their living standards improved, their technology advanced, and their security increased dramatically. Many species considered coalition membership to be the best decision their governments had ever made. Zethkar had watched this transformation with growing unease throughout his final years of observation. The humans had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. They had created a system of voluntary conquest that was more effective than traditional military expansion. The coalition wasn't expanding through force, but through superiority. They offered better alternatives to independence and backed those offers with overwhelming capability to deliver on their promises. Resistance wasn't just futile but genuinely disadvantageous to those who chose it. The remaining independent civilizations were increasingly isolated and disadvantaged. They couldn't compete economically with coalition worlds, couldn't match coalition technology, and couldn't defend themselves against coalition military capabilities. Independence was becoming a luxury that few could afford. But what disturbed Zethkar most was how completely the humans had transformed the nature of galactic civilization. They hadn't just conquered territory or defeated enemies. They had created a new form of organization that made traditional concepts of independence and competition obsolete. The coalition wasn't just a political alliance or military confederation. It was a new kind of civilization that operated according to principles that the humans had developed during their war against the Krillians. Every aspect of coalition society was designed for maximum efficiency and continuous improvement. Coalition citizens were educated, employed, and governed according to scientific principles that optimized their productivity and happiness. The system worked better than any previous form of galactic organization, but it also eliminated the diversity and unpredictability that had characterized galactic civilization for millennia. The humans had solved the fundamental problems of interstellar civilization through comprehensive planning and scientific management. Wars were becoming obsolete because the coalition could resolve conflicts more efficiently than traditional military action. Economic competition was disappearing because coalition cooperation produced better results than independent development. Cultural diversity was gradually declining as coalition members adopted similar values, organizational methods, and social structures. The process wasn't forced but was happening naturally as species discovered that human approaches to problem-solving were generally more effective than their traditional methods. Zethkar's final report included a personal assessment that violated every protocol of the observation corps. He concluded that the humans represented the end of galactic civilization as it had existed for thousands of years and the beginning of something entirely new and unprecedented. The transformation wasn't necessarily negative. Coalition worlds were more prosperous, more secure, and more technologically advanced than independent civilizations. Coalition citizens enjoyed better living conditions, greater opportunities, and more personal freedom than most galactic populations had ever experienced. But the transformation was irreversible. Once a species joined the coalition and experienced the benefits of scientific organization and technological superiority, they couldn't return to their previous existence. The old ways of doing things became obsolete and eventually forgotten. The humans had achieved what no previous galactic power had even attempted. They had created a system that made resistance not just futile but genuinely undesirable. Their enemies didn't just surrender. They see